While we're waiting to get started, I thought I would just try to speak for a moment, just as people are calibrating their systems. I'm not sure if the closed captioning would come on at this point, but I thought I'd give it a try just to see if that's starting to fill in.
So thank you to everybody who's joined so far. We're going to give it about 5 more minutes and we will start right at 2 o'clock. Just also be advised that we are also streaming live on YouTube. So anything, all of the closed captions, anything that's said is also going to be streamed on our YouTube channel as well.
I just went ahead and turned on my video and audio just to make sure it's coming through okay.
Oh, looks great. We'll give it about 1 more minute and get started here. Okay, so it is 2 p.m. here in Eastern Time, so we are going to go ahead and get started. And before we do, I want to say if you need closed captioning, it is going to be at the bottom of your Zoom window on the right-hand side where it says closed captioning with the CC icon. You can click that and click show subtitles, and then you should be able to see the captions at the bottom of the window. So good morning, afternoon, or evening from wherever you're joining us in the world, and thank you for tuning in. The Mental Health and Developmental Disabilities National Training Center is proud to bring you our 4th webinar titled Mental Health Self-Care, Practical Ways to Improve Your Well-Being, with our featured presenter, Dr. Michael Levin from Utah State University. This is such a relevant topic right now, given our global climate, and we're so appreciative to have Dr. Levin speaking today. So I'd like to extend a message to all of you on behalf of our entire MHDD team during this unique and challenging time. Please know that our team is still working hard to support you and the individuals that you may serve, as this is not only a trying time related to our physical health, but our mental health as well. So please continue to visit our social media for resources related to mental health, disability, and COVID-19. And please let us know if there's anything we can do to support you through this process, because we are all in this together. So before we get started, we're going to go through some housekeeping items and mainly the Zoom controls. So Mike, if you go to the second slide, please. Perfect.
And is that showing up the second slide? Great.
It is. Yep. Thank you. So the Zoom controls that we're going to be using are the Q&A feature and the chat box and the hand raising feature, all of which are at the bottom of your Zoom window if you are joining us on Zoom. If you're joining us on YouTube, we're also streaming live on YouTube, so please direct your questions and comments to the live chat that are going to be on the right-hand side of your video window. So we will allot time for content-related questions at the end of the webinar, but if there is a problem during the presentation, like a technology issue, please feel free to type it in the chat box, and our team will do our best to address your concern. So we will send out a link to the recording of this webinar that is going to be on our YouTube channel and our website after the fact, along with a post evaluation and instructions on what to do if you are looking to receive continuing education credit. So now it is my pleasure to introduce our presenter, Dr. Michael Levin. So Dr. Levin is an associate professor in the Department of Psychology at Utah State University and is a licensed psychologist. He received his PhD in clinical psychology from the University of Nevada, Reno, under the mentorship of Dr. Stephen Hayes. Dr. Levin's research focuses on how self-guided online programs and books can be used to improve access to effective mental health resources. His work emphasizes core therapeutic strategies that people can learn and practice on their own based on acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, including how to be mindfully aware of the present, open up to difficult thoughts and feelings, and actively engage in doing what matters. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Levin.
Great. Well, thank you for the introduction, and I'm excited to be speaking to all of you. It's really interesting how this unfolded, that before the pandemic had hit hard in the US, at least, we had discussed doing this webinar, and since then, I think it's really brought to the forefront the need for self-care and the need to just be mindful of our own mental health. We're all, I think, facing a lot of additional challenges and stressors. They don't affect us all equally, and people are really struggling with a lot of challenges right now. So I'm especially excited. I'm happy I agreed to this in the past, and really excited to be talking about it now. So I want to start by, oh, I'm sorry, 1 second. I need to figure out my controls. There we go. So just to start, a quick overview of what we're going to do today. As Danielle mentioned, I come from a particular therapeutic approach, which basically means that I'm working from a certain model that's really well defined by a lot of research at how people get stuck in their lives and ways they can get unstuck. And we've learned that and applied it in therapy, in this case, ACT, or acceptance and commitment therapy. But these core skills you also can learn and apply on your own. And we'll talk about some of those strategies that you can apply in your own life. We're going to do this in a fairly experiential way. So I'll walk you through some of these skills and ideas and ask you to consider how they apply in your own life, or in some cases, to actually try these things out right now. And then at the end, I'll take a few minutes to talk about how you might carry this forward using some evidence-based, self-guided resources that are out there, like books and mobile apps and websites. So just to orient to the challenge, I like to start in thinking about mental health by just appreciating how common it is to have challenges with our mental health. We're often told in our culture and our society and different messages that suffering and psychological challenges are in some way abnormal. And I think it's worth appreciating in some ways. They are quite normal. They're very prevalent. Many individuals end up struggling with mental health problems at different points in their life, or at least struggling with points of enhanced difficult emotions, difficult thoughts. And so from that perspective, I think this can be really relevant to everybody on the call. And that's part of even ACT. You know, as providers, we appreciate we're all swimming in the same in the same ocean of psychological challenges. So this applies in the same way. And when I'm doing therapy, I'm very mindful of how I get stuck in my own thoughts or get stuck fighting difficult emotions. So I really see these as broadly applicable. When we talk about mental health, we can mean difficult emotions that come up. Maybe it's anxiety, sadness, guilt, shame, whatever you find yourself struggling with. It can be certain kind of thinking patterns, ways that our mind tends to get hooked and pulled into unhelpful patterns like self-criticism, worries about the future, going over and over past regrets and things that you wish had gone differently. And I think most importantly, something we'll keep coming back to, what we end up then doing, the activity patterns, what we do with our hands and feet and our actions in our daily life, when we're trying to get away from all this difficult psychological suffering, that I think leads to us getting more stuck. And one of the core things that I want to help present to people is one perspective on how we think about mental health challenges, in that we put a lot of energy in trying to get away from these thoughts and feelings that naturally come up. And when we do that, life can start getting really small, really restricted, and we can lose important, meaningful things that we want to be doing in our life. And that's what I care about at the end of the day, is helping people find, with whatever their challenging life circumstances are, some ways to move towards the things that really matter to them. And we'll kind of talk about each of those ideas as we go forward. I also think mental health is on a continuum. So these skills that we found in research are helpful for people who are really struggling with what we'd think of as a more clinical psychiatric diagnosis, really stuck in a very ingrained pattern. But it can be relevant across that spectrum, including if you're not noticing that you're having particular challenges right now. But there might be opportunities to further enhance your life, to flourish more, to move towards the things that matter. So we're going to kind of look at these skills that I think can be useful wherever you fall on that spectrum. One thing I always like to do whenever I'm talking about mental health is to put a plug in for therapy. I think that's really an excellent way when it's available for you to get help with mental health issues. And part of that has to do with when you work with a therapist, you're working with a licensed expert who we know is going to help you get some perspective on the challenges you're struggling with and can help work with you come up with a plan. And that's a really valuable piece. Like, what am I struggling with? Let me get perspective on it. What do I want to do? And then they're going to teach you skills like the skills we're going to talk about today, but with the support of this ongoing person you're working with. That said, part of why I'm so passionate about self-guided programs and books and things like that is that I know there's a lot of barriers that people run into when they're looking for help. Therapists aren't always available. You might have challenges with access if you're in a rural setting, if you have certain mobility and financial challenges based on what care is available. There's really a variety of different issues that can come up for people. So with that, what we're going to talk about is self-care, which I really like to think of as practicing some of the skills that we typically would do in therapy, but on your own, at your own pace, in whatever ways are helpful for you. So acceptance and commitment therapy, I'm just going to talk a little bit about some broad overview of it. It's a modern cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. What that basically means is a good evidence-based treatment that's kind of consistent with where we've gone in clinical psychology in providing helpful care to people. It's been researched for a long time, but especially in the last 15 years, it's really expanded. It's practiced across the world. It's in our VA centers in the US. The WHO, World Health Organization, has launched programs with it. There's thousands and thousands of practitioners. So it's a really common treatment. One way you can sort of explain ACT using the acronym is that it's going to help you accept difficult thoughts and feelings for what they are. So to make space for whatever you're thinking and feeling without getting stuck in unhelpful patterns, trying to make it go away. And in that space, start to consider, what would you choose to move towards? Like, what is important to you? And if it was up to you and you could make a choice, what would you want to be doing in your life? And most importantly, then taking actions to do the things that matter to you. And that's really where the rubber meets the road, is being able to do the things that are important to you. I'm going to just talk very briefly and generally about the research, but ACT is really what we sometimes call a transdiagnostic treatment, meaning it's designed to help people with a wide range of different types of psychological challenges. And it comes down to this core way that people get stuck that we're going to focus on improving, which we call psychological inflexibility. You can think of this as when your thoughts, feelings, urges, memories, all that internal experience you have, when that starts to really dominate your life and what you do. So if you're really stuck in depression, it can feel like things are hopeless. I can't even get out of bed. I don't want to move. I have no energy. And psychological inflexibility is when we get stuck in a pattern where all that stuff really drives what you do. So you stay in bed, you don't answer phone calls, you don't get out of bed, you don't shower, you don't do the things that are meaningful to you in your life. The thoughts and feelings are really like in control in that moment. And so that pattern that we're going to explore more in today, we've found in research is related to a wide range of different mental health issues, struggles with trauma, addictions, eating disorders, chronic pain, anxiety, depression, psychosis, being able to stick it out in treatment, different psychosocial challenges, getting burnt out and stressed, your overall well-being, how you're performing in work, and different healthcare outcomes, coping with different chronic medical issues. We have a lot of work, for example, in areas like cancer, diabetes, chronic pain, and how these types of skills can be helpful for people managing these challenging situations. So it's this core process that we're going after and that we're going to try to target. There's a lot of research on ACT as well, in terms of how we can use this treatment to help people get unstuck in their lives. So this is kind of a funny graph because there's just a lot of research out there, but we say RCTs here. Those are randomized controlled trials. If you've been following some of the news when we're talking about, for example, developing new treatments for COVID, RCTs are like our gold standard way to test to see, is this treatment effective? And basically what we're showing here is the number of RCTs done on ACT, showing that ACT is effective per year. And you can see it's really gone up over years. And in the past few years, we have over one a week coming out in a wide range of areas, showing that ACT is helpful for different mental health concerns. These are examples of areas that ACT has been found effective. So a lot of different common mental health problems as we traditionally define them. So like depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, eating disorders, addictions, schizophrenia and psychosis, self-harm, different behavioral health problems. So coping with different medical conditions, and then also other domains of like with your work and your performance at work, burnout, parenting, performance in athletics, dealing with stigma. Part of why I mention this is what we're really getting at. I know I'm kind of listing a lot of problems quickly, is the idea that there's really these kind of core patterns and ways we get stuck in our life. And ACT seems helpful in targeting that pattern to get unstuck. And with that in mind, I'm going to teach some skills today that hopefully can help you get some perspective, at least learning one perspective on ways you can get stuck, and some skills you can use to get unstuck that seem helpful for a lot of different concerns you might have. So let's talk about how people get stuck a bit. I'm going to present one perspective. There's a lot of ways we can talk about our mental health and about what happens between our ears and our psychological experiences, but let's talk through one perspective. And we're going to break it down in a few ways. One way to think of it is we've got this stuff happening between our ears, our inner experience, stuff that nobody else sees. It's what we feel, what we think, the sensations we have. And then on the other side, on the lower end, we have what we experience with our five senses. So what other people can see, what we can touch, what we can taste, what we can observe, and so on. And I like to think of it as like kind of like what you do with your actions. So you've got this stuff happening internally, and then the actions that you take in your life. And then we've got this other piece on this perspective, which is what you want to be moving towards on the right side. So these are the things that you want to move towards in your life. And then on the left side, what you want to get away from, what the things are that you don't like, you don't want, that you try to get away from. And then we can start to unpack our psychological experiences, I think, in a really interesting way using this. So we have a worksheet that we can send out along with some other links that kind of walks through this, but I'll first just describe it. So first, in this upper left section, we're thinking, what are these internal experiences, like thoughts and feelings, you want to get away from? So it might be emotions like sadness, anxiety, shame. It could be difficult thoughts like worries about the future, self-critical thoughts, going over and over something bad that happened. But it's sort of like the internal stuff that we struggle with and we don't want. And then the next question to consider is, what do you do to try to move away from these thoughts and feelings? So how do you try to get away from anxiety when it shows up, or self-criticism when it shows up? Maybe you try to distract. Maybe as you start thinking like, oh, I'm a failure at this, you just say, okay, I'm just going to go on my phone and just do something else. And it helps you get away from that self-criticism. That's sort of the goal of it. Or it might be things that you do to soothe, like when you're feeling really overwhelmed, maybe you turn to food or alcohol or other substances to just get some relief from that feeling. Another one we see often is opting out or avoiding things. It's interesting in our current environment that we're in with the pandemic, but I think we still see a lot of opportunities. Do you reply to a text or not? People ask if you want to do a Zoom meeting, and do you do it, or do you kind of avoid friends and family that want to connect? Do you talk to the people in your house around you? So it's kind of like, do we withdraw? And those are other ways that we try to get away from our thoughts and feelings. On the right side, we start to bring out the other part. And this is the part I've been sort of hinting at so far, which is who or what is important to you. We have these psychological struggles, but we also have things that really matter to us, goals and values and things that our life, that's important to us in our life. Maybe it's friends and family. It could be these kind of more qualities we want to bring to how we act, like growing as a person, compassion, being curious, being adventurous, being kind. And finally, if we go from the ideas of what we want to do to the actions, thinking about what you can do to move towards those things that are important to you. So you might choose to call a friend as a way to be compassionate because you know they're struggling. You might read a book as a way to grow as a person, or exercise to challenge yourself, or cook. Maybe it's actually a way to connect with family or friends. So there's a lot of ways we can do things to move towards what matters. So if you're following so far, the idea is, here's a snapshot and perspective on the stuff that matters and the ways we get stuck. And we're going to work with that a bit more. So a common thing that we see is people get stuck on the left side on these things they want to get away from for the very reason that they want to get away from it. And don't believe me, but I think as we talk, start looking at your own experience to see if it fits for you. So a common thing, I might feel anxious about all these things I have to do. Bills are piling up, or there's chores around the house, or there's people to call back. And maybe I just get so overwhelmed. I'm just like, okay, I'm just gonna like watch Netflix. I'm gonna rewatch Tiger King again because I just like need to not deal with that anxiety for a second. And that's a common procrastination cycle. But then what happens when that episode ends? Well, Netflix says you want to let another one play. Okay. But in that moment, when you take a pause, probably you start feeling more anxious, right? Because, okay, now half an hour has gone by. I feel even more behind. I feel even more like I can't do this. And I'm even more anxious. And when I feel that way, I have the urge to escape more by watching more Netflix. And so we get in these cycles where we're trying to get away from this thing we don't want. And as a result, we actually feed more of what we don't want. We feed more anxiety. Most importantly, too, we miss out on that right side. So those things that really matter to you that you want to move towards, those fall out of focus. So maybe you wanted to work on an interesting project. You're excited to be creative, but you're not doing that because you're watching Netflix instead. Or you really want to take care of responsibilities and work hard, but you're not doing those chores that really matter to you because you're watching Netflix to get away from anxiety. So we lose these things that really matter to us. We lose time and energy going to it because we're focused so much on getting away from what we don't want to think and feel. And that's really the way in ACT that we see people getting stuck in their life. And this is psychological inflexibility. We get stuck in this cycle of trying to get away from our thoughts and feelings. And as we do, just getting more and more enmeshed in these thoughts and feelings, and more like we have to get away. And life just gets smaller and smaller. Those values that you want to move towards, they start to shrink over time. This sounds a little bit morbid, but the first step in working on our mental health is just to appreciate where we can, or maybe currently are, stuck. So I'd ask everyone if you could take a few moments right now and try to fill this out for yourself. So answer the 4 questions on this screen. You could just do it in your head. You could write it out, whatever is useful to you. But this is, I find, and I've found actually in research, just going back to these questions can help you improve your mental health because they give you perspective on what you're experiencing. So take a moment right now and think about, what are some difficult thoughts and feelings you struggle with? And once you have a few in mind, see if you can take a moment right now to think about how you try to get away from those thoughts and feelings. Do you do things to distract? Do you avoid situations? Do you try to soothe with substances or food? And once you have a few of those in your mind, switch over to the other side. And I really want people to try this right now. Think for yourself who or what is really important to you in your life. Could be certain people, could be categories like family, friends, communities. It could be more about like actions and kind of like values like compassion, curiosity, adventure, growth, challenge, being genuine. And see if you can get one in your mind. If you don't know, that's okay. Try to like just pick one as a guess. Like, I don't know if this matters, but let me pick it. And think for a moment, like, what are some things you could do to move towards that value in your life? What are some things you could do, like even today? And maybe your mind first says all the things we can't do because of practical barriers we run into. But even think about very small things, like the tiny little choices we can make in our life, texting someone back, just looking up a class or a hobby. And we're going to go ahead and move on, but I really encourage people to think about this framework, and we have a worksheet you can use in an ongoing way, because I think getting some perspective and looking at those things can help a lot. What we know is awareness helps a lot with self-care, and if we can notice ways we're getting stuck, and we can notice the things we want to be moving towards and be intentional, really make choices like what do we want to be doing right now, it's a huge part of improving our mental health. But I want to come back to, so far I've been pushing this idea that when we try to get away from what we don't want to think and feel, we can get really stuck. And that doesn't always fit the messages we hear, right? When we see medication messages about, antidepressants, we're often told how, we should be happy and we shouldn't have these feelings. When we hear in our culture, in our community, how it's important to be happy, just cheer up and so on. So our cultures and our communities often communicate that we should try to get away from these things. And I don't want to add to that by saying, no, you should not want to try to get away from them. What I really want to do is encourage you to look at your own experience and don't believe me, don't believe anyone. Look at your own experience to see, how does this play out? Does focusing on trying to make your thoughts and feelings help you to do the things that matter or lead to you to getting stuck? So we're going to do one more where I'm going to ask you to kind of like try to think through it right here and now. I want you to start by thinking about an away move that you typically take, but try to pick something you think might not be helpful, because it varies, like exercise. Well, I feel better, but it's healthy. But like try to pick something that's more clearly a problem that you know of. And think through these questions. So first of all, when you do this thing, maybe it's distracting, it's avoiding things, it's soothing. When you do this, what happens in the short term? So right when you do this activity, right afterwards, what happens? Do you feel relief? Do you feel worse? Do you feel better? And then what happens over time? So a few hours later, a couple days later, do you feel better? Do you feel worse? And think about that right side of that figure we looked at. What about those things that you want to be doing, that you want to move towards in your life? Are you able to do those things because you distracted, because you soothed? Or does it actually take away from being the kind of person you want to be? Or do you miss out on things because you're putting all this energy on distracting, on avoiding? And I really want you to just hold that lightly. It might feel like, I kind of want you to just tell me the answer, or I'm not sure what I think of it. Being not sure or even being confused, frankly, is helpful at this phase, because the idea is we're not trying to just like come up with new rules for living. It's more about coming up with a different way of approaching these challenges, which is to just look at your own experience and see, is this working for me? Is this helping me do the things I want to do? Um, I'll give a couple other examples of how we often see it playing out for people. You might feel sad or down, and maybe you try to you kind of withdraw, you avoid. You feel so bad, you just kind of like don't want to get out of bed, you don't want to text people, you just feel awful, and it gives maybe like a little relief in the moment. Like if you've ever canceled something you're supposed to do, you know that feeling of relief for a moment. You're like, oh, okay, I don't have to do that, right? Even something you were excited for. It's interesting. That's how we work as humans. So you get that short-term relief. But over time, maybe as that event comes up, as like, okay, now it's time I would be having dinner with those people, or I would be on that phone call or Zoom call with people, you might start having your mind actually start to go, I'm so alone. What's wrong with me? Why am I avoiding people? And you start feeling more sad and more ashamed. So it works in the short term, but over time, you might feel worse. And again, you're missing out on that stuff on the right side. You're missing out on those things that you want to be moving towards in your life. So you're not connecting with other people because you're really stuck in just trying not to feel sad. And that's the really bad deal with all this. When we follow this away move agenda, we miss out on the things we really want to be moving on in our life. And one thing we like to do in ACT is just consider, like, what are you not doing in your life right now because of difficult thoughts and feelings? And it's not about, and I really like encourage people, be self-compassionate. It makes sense that happens, but just notice, gosh, there's things that really matter to me and I'm not doing them maybe right now because I have this agenda. I have to make these thoughts and feelings go away. Another example, maybe you feel stressed out and you might drink to calm down. And maybe at first you feel more calmed down, but like, let's say you had a goal not to drink for whatever reason. You might find that, okay, now that you drank, you're like, oh, the next day, like, I can't believe I did that. I'm so stressed out. I can't even take care of that goal. I failed at my goal. And then sometimes we know with these substances, it can physiologically in your own body just make you feel more depressed over time. So you drank, you got relief, but over time you felt worse. And again, you might have missed out on these really cool things that you wanted to be doing in your life, but attention and energy was focused on getting away. Um, I know we're spending a lot of time here, but this is, in my opinion, half the battle or half of the work in mental health, which is just noticing how we get stuck. Not believing me is like, this is how the world works, but really like noticing in your own life, like, how am I getting stuck in my own life? And once we bring that light of awareness, if you're noticing things that aren't working, that's going to do a lot for making changes. Awareness is so key in being able to make changes. And I want us to do that in a way that's self-compassionate. It makes sense that when we don't want to feel ways, that we're going to do things to try not to feel that way. So there should be no judgment in it, in that, like, yeah, it makes sense. Everyone does it. I do it. And we hear it all the time in our culture, in our community. And part of it is, it's kind of like how we've evolved as humans, is we've learned this way of problem solving, and it works great in our outer world. So in our outer world, if there's things we don't like, we don't have total control over them, but we often can figure out, what don't I like and how can I change it? Maybe I don't like the color of my room and I could paint it, or I could talk with somebody about maybe painting it. I could at least express it, like, okay, I want this color to change. If I don't like my clothes, again, I could change them or work with someone to change them. So I can, if I don't like something in my outer world, I can make steps to try to change it. And that doesn't mean we have perfect control, but like, that kind of is how problem solving works. What don't I like and how can we fix it? And the issue is, maybe it's kind of a bad deal. It's a rigged game when it comes to our inner world. Maybe we don't have the same control with our thoughts and feelings. So let's try an exercise, and I'd encourage you, really try it right now. Even if it feels silly, that's kind of part of ACT, as we do some things that are kind of silly because we're trying to do something different. And that's my goal here, is I want to give people some things that maybe feel a little bit different, a little bit of a different perspective or some different strategies, because I think that's how change happens, is we try something new that breaks us out of our typical approach. So really try these things. I'll do them with you. First, lift your right hand, or if you're not able to, hum a note. Okay, now close your eyes for a few seconds. Okay. Now feel perfectly joyful and happy, the happiest you've ever felt right now. Just feel happy. Okay, now take a painful memory that really hurts you and completely erase it from your mind so you never have it again. Okay, got it? So which was easier? Was it easier to do things with your hands and feet in ways that you're physically able to, or hum a note or blink your eyes? Was that part easier with your outer world? Or was it easier to feel perfectly happy or erase thoughts you don't want to have? And what we often find is that it's a lot easier to do things with our actions, with what we do that other people can see, than with changing what's happening inside our head, those thoughts and feelings. And maybe our inner world just doesn't work like the outer world. And this is kind of where I want to leave this idea, is the question, because I want it to be something you explore in your own life. And you just look to see, how is this working in my life? Which is that maybe this is a rigged game. Maybe the more you're trying not to think and feel certain things, the more you're going to have those things. The more you don't want to feel anxious, the more anxious you get. Like, have you ever started to feel anxious? You're like, oh no, I can't feel anxious right now. I'm talking in a crowd. I don't want them to see I'm anxious. And you start getting more anxious because that's scary. Or you feel depressed and it really sucks. You feel depressed and you don't want to feel depressed. So you start feeling depressed about depression. That's the cycle. And I think that's a really common way we get stuck, when we can't have our thoughts and feelings for what they are. And when we get stuck and really trying to make them go away. So that's really half the work. And that's why I want to spend half the time there, is I really encourage you to explore, and you can use that matrix, that figure we were working in with the 4 quadrants, to explore how this applies in your own life. But I do want to talk also about some skills to get unstuck. So what can we do with our thoughts and feelings? I'm going to talk about a few ideas just to throw out some initial ways you could try this out. So one thing I really like to bring into focus here is that when we're in a battle with our thoughts and feelings, when they feel like the enemy, we get stuck in like, these are wrong, they're bad, or maybe I shouldn't have them. There's something wrong with me for having them. And if we slow down, it might be worth appreciating that, for example, our mind and the thoughts that our mind gives us, they actually serve a purpose. Like, our minds are really helpful in a lot of ways. Our minds have allowed us to have all the technology that allows me to speak to you from my house in Utah to your home wherever you are. Minds can achieve a lot of stuff, but that doesn't mean they're always helpful. And so one way I like to think of it is, your mind is like an overeager assistant. It's trying to help you. It's evolved to help you, but it's really eager. It really wants to do a good job. And especially how it's evolved is to help keep you safe and to help avoid danger, which means it's really threat focused. It's really focused on what could go wrong, how you might fail, what happened wrong in the past. And so just like this overeager assistant, this mind is constantly handing you notes. Hey boss, don't forget this. Hey boss, remember that time you failed 3 years ago? Maybe you'll always fail. Hey boss, that thing you have tomorrow? It could go horribly wrong. And that's what it's doing, is trying to keep you safe, but it's constantly telling you all these things to watch out for. So here's the question. What do you do as a boss? Well, one thing you could do is just do whatever your assistant tells you. So if your assistant tells you this could go horribly wrong, well, then don't do it. If your assistant tells you, oh, that thing that happened 3 years ago was awful, well, then we probably should spend all the rest of the day focused on that and really go over and over all the things that happened that were wrong. But how well does that work? Well, probably not great, right? Like you're a boss, you have things that you want to be doing. And instead, this overeager assistant that's constantly handing you notes, you're just doing whatever it tells you. So that's not going to run very well. And it's not a great way for running your life. That went to the end, which is not where we wanted to be. So 1 second. I'll use an example while I pull up my slide. Right now, my overeager assistant is telling me that I am going to make that same mistake again, and I need to figure it out and spend the next 10 minutes doing tech support. And I'm not going to do that. I'm going to say, thanks for the thought, mind, and get back to what we were saying. So another thing we could do as a boss, you might tell your assistant, okay, shut up. I don't want to hear from you. But how well does that work? Is that the kind of boss you want to be that yells at their employees? And how does that work in your own life when really this assistant is part of you? So you're telling yourself to shut up and your mind is trying to be helpful. It's probably not how you want to live life. And honestly, we can't keep our assistant quiet. You can try to keep your mind quiet. It's going to keep going. It's way too eager to stop. There's another thing we could do though, which is recognize you're the boss. You get to decide what to do and just thank your mind. So your assistant hands you a note saying, hey, you might fail at that thing that's happening right now. Like right now, my assistant's saying, hey, you need to not talk fast. And like, you need to talk really slow. And I could get stuck in that where I kind of lose attention to what I'm doing here. And I'm just like, now I'm thinking like, oh, I can't believe I talk so fast. What's wrong with me? And that's not helpful. So instead, I'm going to notice it. I'm going to say, oh, thanks, mind, and get back to what I was doing. In that case, it's an example. The thought's helpful. I want to talk slower, but I don't need to get like caught up in all the extra stuff like, oh, I messed up, blah, 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 blah. That's not useful. So you can just thank your mind, take the info as you want, and move on. So let's talk about that skill specifically, thanking your mind. Here's how I like to do it. I like to start by just acknowledging the thought as just a thought. And I'd like you to try it right now. Take whatever thought you have next, whatever runs through your mind right now, and just add the label, my mind is telling me. So you might realize my mind is telling me I don't quite get this, or my mind is telling me this is a great skill, or my mind is telling me I really got to take care of this thing when this webinar is done. So whatever thoughts you're getting, just label it as a thought. And then thank your mind. So just simply say, thanks mind for the thought. Thanks for help. Thanks for telling me, you know, what's happening right now. Thanks for trying to keep me safe, or thanks for trying to help me. You don't have to add a lot. I usually just say, thanks, mind. So my mind is telling me I might be talking quickly again. And I'm saying, thanks, mind. And then decide what to do. So once you've noticed the thought, then decide, okay, do I want to focus on it? Do you want to spend the next 5 minutes planning out what you need to do next? Do you want to spend the next 5 minutes kind of just being confused and thinking about why this doesn't make sense and what that means? It depends, but probably and usually, because our mind is constantly giving us notes, the default is notice it and then get back to what you're doing. So let's get back to talking. Let's get back to exploring skills. So let's do this in a more in-depth experiential way. I'm going to guide you through an exercise. If you're able to close your eyes, that makes it easier. If you're not able to because you're following closed captioning or otherwise aren't comfortable closing your eyes, you can just kind of focus on this screen. What I'm going to have you do is imagine a stream floating, a stream going by with leaves floating down it. And what we're going to practice is every time you notice a thought in your head, just put it on a leaf floating by. So the idea is you might have the thought, I'm not sure how to do this. And as I think that, I'm going to imagine it being on one of these leaves on the screen and just float by. You might have the thought that, oh, I can't believe I said that thing earlier. And again, just notice it and let it flow by. What we're not doing is going, oh, I can't believe I said that earlier. Why did I say that? Oh, that's so embarrassing. What do I need to do to make it right? Like when I do that, I've lost my focus from the exercise. So when that happens, it's going to happen. Just acknowledge it and come back to putting that on a leaf floating by. So the trick with this exercise we're going to do in just a moment is just to have a few experiences of noticing the stream of thoughts in your mind and just watch it go by. Just notice it as a thought floating by. So go ahead right now. And if you're comfortable and able to, close your eyes. If not, you can just use this image on the screen. Take a moment to just get centered in the present. Notice your inhalations and exhalations. So notice as you breathe in and your lungs fill. And the sensations as you breathe out. And see if you can start to let an image form, however it forms in your mind, of a river or stream. Maybe it's going around some rocks or around some trees. And picture whatever this stream looks like has leaves floating down. They might be going fast or slow. It doesn't matter. Now, what I want you to practice is just turning to your mind right now. And each time you notice a thought, Imagine sort of pulling it out and putting it onto one of those leaves as words, as an image. Just imagine putting each thought you have on a leaf. And go ahead and start trying that right now. You might have the thought, am I doing it right? Just notice that as a thought and put it on a leaf. You might notice a lot of thoughts. You don't have to catch every one. Just practice taking one of those thoughts and putting it on a leaf and let it float by. Maybe you're thinking about things in the future or the past. You might be caught up in them. Again, just notice each time you catch a thought and place it on a leaf floating by. Try this for a few more moments before we end. Go ahead and take a moment. Just let your awareness expand again. Notice the sensations of your breath coming in and out. Take a moment to just notice the sounds you hear in the room. And when you're ready, go ahead and open your eyes or come back. I'd be happy to discuss this and other exercises further at the end of the talk, just because I want to teach a couple more skills. We'll move on. But some things that I'd ask you to consider are whether you had any moments, even if it was just one, even if it was just for a moment, where you were able to kind of like catch those thoughts and just imagine them as leaves floating by. You might also have had a lot of moments where you were caught up in your thoughts or confused. And that's okay. But see if you can notice those times where you're able to catch that and come back. In a lot of ways, that's the thanking your mind skill. In a lot of ways, that's core to working with our thoughts, is just notice when we're caught up in them and come back to the present, not by trying to get rid of the thoughts, but more just like noticing them like a leaf floating by or a note from an assistant. We don't have to try to make them go away. We can just notice them for what they are. So let me go to another skill that's a similar kind of idea, but focused on our feelings. This won't be as experiential, but I'll just introduce an idea. So if we were going to take the same concept of noticing thoughts as thoughts, we can do that with our feelings. And I like this acronym NAME. So when you have a difficult emotion, practice naming it. That means notice when you're having a feeling. So when you're finding yourself really tightening up and feeling stressed out, notice, hey, I'm really stressed out. I'm tensed up. So notice whatever when you're having a feeling and just acknowledge it. And this is so key. One of the things we can really do effectively with our feelings is just to label and recognize when we're having a feeling like, hey, I'm feeling guilty right now, or hey, I'm feeling scared right now. And just simply label what we're having as what it is. It's okay to have those feelings. We can take it a step further though, and gets more into some act skills by almost like leaning into that emotion, by trying to like really make space for it, make room for it. The way I like to do it is to practice being mindful, being really attentive to the sensations in my body. So, okay, I'm feeling ashamed right now, and I'm kind of like noticing this like curled up feeling, and maybe like a tense feeling in my chest, and I'm just gonna notice it for what it is, almost like I'd look at an interesting painting, like just being really curious about what it feels like. It would also feel bad, but that's okay. But I'm gonna like just kind of focus on those sensations. So a way to kind of make room for what's there. And then eventually we want to move on. So then we expand our attention and we get back to that right side of the diagram, right? To the things you want to be moving towards. But we do that not by getting rid of our feelings. We do it by naming our feelings, by making space for them. I'm just going to briefly mention this for time, but all our different feelings tend to have this combination of things that we feel in our body, thoughts we have, and urges. And that's because emotions, they actually have a lot of utility. They help us with things. So when we get anxious, our body starts reacting like there's danger. And that's because it's getting us ready to fight or to flee. And so we might have these like urges to run away, right? Or thoughts about where's danger because it's doing this stuff for us to help us get ready for danger. And that's useful in a lot of ways, but it doesn't always go off. It doesn't always happen at useful times. So there's times where we're anxious, but there's nothing to actually run away from. And so that's a really nice time to just name your feelings. Like, okay, I feel anxious and I'm just going to make room for it, but I'm not going to act on it. And we can do that similarly with other emotions. I can talk about that more at the end. Okay, so we've talked a lot about how people get stuck on this left side. Let's talk a little about the right side because that's really important. So we have these skills like naming your feelings, thanking your mind, noticing your thoughts as thoughts like leaves on a stream. And the reason that matters is if we can make room for those experiences without getting stuck in away moves, then that can give us the space to bring our focus back to what really matters, to our values and what's important, and taking actions to move towards those things. And I like to focus on our values and what matters in terms of what we have control over. There's a lot of things in our life that we don't have control over. And if we were going to base the meaning and purpose in our life on those things, life can feel really grim at times. And it is what it is. We do go through horrible situations and experiences. But at the same time, I think there's really inspiring messages and examples like Frankel going through the Holocaust where people find meaning and purpose even in really difficult situations. And so I like to bring the attention on what we do have control over in whatever situations we're in, like a pandemic right now. So we want people to treat us well, we want to feel good, but we can't always control those things. Um, and really, in a lot of situations, what we can have the most control over is how we do things. So we might not even have control over the situations we're in, like being stuck at home or stuck in difficult situations with the pandemic. But what we can focus on is how we do things, the qualities we bring to what we do. So you're spending time with family. And how do you want to do that? Do you want to do it in a way where you're zoned out, you're just kind of like spaced out, or maybe you're annoyed at your family? Or do you want to be in the same situation and connect with family because you really care about those relationships? Or maybe you care about being you and being genuine. And so it might even be some conflicting interactions. Like you might actually say some things about what you disagree with your family because you value being genuine. So you can do things in a lot of ways. It's really about what matters to you, the kind of person you want to be in these situations. You can help a friend in a way that's caring if that really matters, or you can help a friend in a really resentful, annoyed way. So it's how you do those things. And so we'll take just a few moments there for time. One way I like to think of it is it's like a compass. So we pick a direction we want to head. So a common one for me is adventure, having exciting new experiences. I really like value that. That's something really important to me. And so that would be like heading east. I'm going to pick this direction to head. And the idea is just like a compass, it's not like I can ever get to east, right? I can always head more east. And the idea isn't so much how far east I get. Like, did I climb Mount Everest? Like, no, like that's not me. And if you know me, like I'm not gonna do that. But it's more in any moment I could look at my compass and see how I could bring that value into my life. So we're stuck at home. It's really challenging, but I could have this cool new experience that feels adventurous to me by learning a new hobby that I'm interested in. I started doing yoga, which was new for me. And okay, I do yoga. I'm not done being adventurous. There's always more to head. I finished my class and I think like, okay, well, what's another way to move towards that? Well, my partner, she's really awesome at being adventurous. She's working on a new house project. Okay, how could I learn that? And rather than being annoyed that I'm having to do this house project, could I actually find a way to make that really adventurous and exciting? And you can do the same thing with being compassionate, with growing as a person, whatever it is. It's about that direction you want to head. And in any moment, coming back and looking at your compass and saying, how do I move towards that thing that really matters to me? Let's just do one quick exercise to explore that. So one way you can think of values is it's what we can see in how people act. And so you can think of someone you admire, maybe a celebrity, a historical figure, someone in your personal life, and take a moment right now and just think about what you admire about them, not in terms of what they've achieved, how people think of them, how they feel, but really like what do you admire in terms of the kind of person they are, the qualities they bring to what they do. For example, Martin Luther King, I'm not going to lead a million person march, but I could admire the compassion, persistence, and find other ways to bring that into my life. Doing this talk is an example of it for me as a way to be able to help support other people. So thinking for yourself, what are those qualities that you admire in somebody else? Let's take a moment for that. That's something you can keep pondering, but I want to leave this part with just one last question for you to consider. At the end of the day, it's really about what you do, um, including in really challenging circumstances, finding small things we can do to head in that east direction, to follow your compass in whatever ways you can. And so I'd like to ask you to consider with the different values we've been exploring, what's one small thing you could do today that would help move you towards your values? Very importantly, something small. So if it feels big, we get stuck in this cycle of then I work on it and I don't quite get there and then I judge myself and I give up and blah, blah, blah. It's about the small things. It's about the moment to moment choices we make. And that's what we're going to practice here is bringing a lot of purpose to taking one small action, and that'll build momentum in your life. So, for example, if you want to be compassionate, maybe it's just checking in on a friend you haven't heard from in a while. Or if you want to grow as a person, maybe it's just Googling for 5 minutes to look at what are some interesting hobbies you could take up that you could do right now. So just take a moment for that. So I really encourage you to try to set some commitment for yourself for today to do one small thing. And if that works well, do it again. And if you run into problems, I still encourage you to do it again. Because that's what at the end of the day, what this is all about is helping you do the things that matter to you. And I think in a lot of ways, that's mental health self-care is doing the things that really matter to you while we make space for whatever difficult thoughts and feelings come along for the ride. Because there are a lot of challenging things that come up. And this kind of summarizes what we talked through. So breaking those unhelpful away move cycles, practicing these ways to make room for your thoughts and feelings, and then using that as a way to move towards the things that really matter to you. I'm painfully aware of the time, but I was listening to my mind say I need to talk slower. So I'm going to go a little quicker and just hit some highlights on self-help resources. But we have materials that'll be posted that include more detailed information. So one thing I want to note, if you want to do more of this work, so we've been talking about ACT. There's a nice therapist finder on this website link that you can use to find a therapist in your area. And many therapists are doing video conferencing based therapy. You could review the slides insofar as they've been helpful. And you can use other resources. I'm going to skip this slide, sorry, but we can talk about it later. So for books, I really like this database. There's a lot of self-help resources out there. They're not well regulated. So I really recommend going to some good sources to find something that we know would be helpful to you. I really like this database. It's researchers who really know what's effective, and they've picked this set of books and said, hey, here's a good set to use. If you're looking for ACT, I really like these books, The Happiness Trap by Russ Harris, the Mindfulness and Acceptance Workbook for Anxiety. Those are really nice books using ACT. And if you're interested, especially on that kind of like how to like just make room for your thoughts and feelings, I like this mindfulness-based stress reduction workbook too. There's a lot of apps out there. I'd recommend going to this website as, again, really good source. Psychologists have vetted apps and said, hey, here's a good set. You can look by problem area and you get reviews to kind of know what the app is like. There's some good ACT apps out there. ACT Companion I like. ACT Coach is another that's free. And more generally, the VA has a whole set of apps that I think are really useful for a lot of different mental health problems. I like Stop, Breathe, and Think for mindfulness as well. I know I'm going quick, but this will all be available in the download. Last one, I'll make a quick plug. We have a self-guided website called Act Guide that you can sign up for $10, and that covers the hosting fees and a grad student with anything left over to continue running the site. But that's a program that I run. None of the money goes to me, but it helps just kind of support its ongoing running. And it would teach you some of these ACT skills across 12 sessions in an online format. Okay, I'll turn it over.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. And I was feverishly taking notes, and I'm sure a lot of other people were. So thank you so much. And thank you all for your time and attention. And before we open the floor for questions, we want to make you aware of our next webinar, which will be held July 23rd at the same time from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern with our featured presenter, who's also an advisory board member, Marinike. So June is Minority Mental Health Awareness Month. So Marinike will be highlighting the unique intersection that she and many other individuals experience as a person of color with a disability and a mental health condition. So the webinar is titled Sick and Tired of Being Sick and Tired, People of Color, Disabilities, and Mental Health. So that link to registration will be sent out in the follow-up email and will also be posted on our website and our social media. And with that, we will turn it over to questions. There was one in particular that I really resonated with. It was while we were doing the guided imagery and the leaf floating activity, someone was asking, what if you're imagining a boulder that's sinking to the bottom of the stream, or in your mind, the stream isn't moving quick enough to carry the leaf? So I think just kind of, if you're trying to do one of these activities and you're really struggling to go along with that imagery, what are some suggestions that you might have?
Yeah, that's wonderful and a great question. The fun part with it is that really like what this practice is really about is making space for whatever is there and just noticing it for what it is. So if a boulder's in the middle of your stream, great, let's make space for that. If the stream is flying by and you're having a million thoughts and you're thinking, I'm doing this terribly, I did it great last time, why am I doing it wrong? Perfect. Let's start just noticing some of those and put them on leaves. If you're not having any thoughts and you're like, oh my gosh, what's happening? Cool. Let's notice that. And when you notice a thought, let's put it on a leaf. It may sound dismissive, but actually it's kind of really more the opposite. It's really about just being okay with whatever's there. And that's hard to do. It's incredibly hard to do. And the cool part is that you're taking a few minutes to actively practice doing it. And if you're doing it simply because you come back at some point to imagining a stream and putting some thoughts on leaves. So if you get distracted for 9 minutes and 58 seconds and you only had 2 seconds that you did it, awesome. I still think that's great because you just started to pry open the door to do something different with these thoughts. And that's the trick, is just starting to do something different. And the more you do it, it gets easier, but you still will run into challenges. So it's just making room for those challenges when they come up.
Wonderful, thank you. And then as we're waiting, I don't know if there's any questions on YouTube, I'll check really quickly. But Mike, if you could also just talk about like the accessibility of this. I think it kind of shows from the way in which we did the activities that it is accessible to, a wide variety of people, but maybe some of your experiences in different populations that you've worked with who've benefited from using these types of techniques.
Yes. So we have found it useful for individuals with disabilities, but there's so many unique challenges depending on the personal struggles that people are running into. And like, as you announced, that upcoming webinar, I think is a great example of how these things can intersect too for individuals. So I think that we have some nice data to suggest it's useful for people, that these are common struggles. But certainly it hasn't been tested in every area. Like, I know we've been doing some work in like audiology and there's some like cool, interesting applications. And we're like, this seems promising. We have good data, but more research needs to be done. That's a classic researcher statement. We do have some data, for example, with physical disabilities. Most of that, though, is kind of couched more in chronic pain or other health conditions, which isn't the same thing, obviously. Like they intersect, but it's a Venn diagram. With developmental disabilities, there's some good early promising research that it's helpful. Sometimes it's adapted in certain ways for what it's worth. Like you can hear how abstract it can get, which I don't think is useful to anybody when we get real abstract. But so sometimes there's some adaptations made to protocols that can be useful for people. And again, some good preliminary data there.
Awesome. We have another question. Kathleen says, these are great examples of what to do when experiencing acute stress and stressors, but will these same techniques be useful if someone is experiencing a panic attack?
Oh, wonderful. That's a great question. So let me think. So I would say that when someone's experiencing a really intense emotional experience, like a panic attack, individuals with a history of trauma, there can just be these other kinds of floods of emotions that come. It can be challenging. We do have another set of skills we sometimes use. They're called like grounding skills. So they focus a little bit more on like, okay, take 5 deep breaths. The reason I paused here, I really struggle with this, is what we're trying to do at the end of the day is like let those panic attacks come and go without trying to make them go away. Like working with panic attacks is a good example where the treatment for panic that has the best data, it's really effective, is that we actually try to induce panic attacks and just let them be there and ride them out. Because where people get really stuck, and panic attacks are awful. I don't mean to make light of that, but where people get really stuck is they start feeling like they absolutely can't have panic attacks, and then life gets really small because of it. So interestingly, I would say the strategy is the same in terms of like, writing that emotion out and letting it be there without making it bigger. But there are some other kind of target skills like grounding exercises that I think are a little bit more helpful for people. I like name. Name actually is a pretty good one for that, but you have to really practice it to get good at it. So practice also helps a lot.
Great, thank you. So I think that is all of the questions that I'm seeing. Let me scroll through quickly. But yeah, so to people who are asking, this is not only being live streamed on YouTube, but it will then live there forever and ever. So we will send out the link to that. It will also be on our website. We'll also send out the PowerPoint slides. And I will put in the chat if you have any other questions. The email to reach us is info@mhddcenter.org. So like I said, y'all be receiving a follow-up email for us. And if you have any additional questions, any other questions that you might think of, we'll definitely send those along to Dr. Levin. But again, thank you all so much for joining. We will, yes, somebody said, yes, we'll get a copy of the slides. But thank you all so much for joining, and we'll be on here for another couple minutes if anything pops in. But we wish you all well wishes, most physical and mental well wishes, and thank you again for your time.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. And I would be happy to stay on if there are any remaining questions.
Yeah, we'll hang out for a second. It looked like somebody had their hand raised on the chat, but then lowered it. So if you all have a question, feel free to put it in the chat or the Q&A.
I see if that was nice. Thank you for the messages too. I appreciate it.
Yes, you're welcome. I have, like I said, I have that same problem. So it's always helpful if somebody does that for me.
Yeah.
Link information about CEs. Yes, so in the follow-up email, we will give you instructions about how to go about getting certificates for the continuing education credit. So be on the lookout. And again, it's that same info@mhddcenter.org that will be coming to you. So we will provide all the information in that email about how to get the CEs. And the post-evaluation will also be sent, the link to that will also be sent in the email. So you should be getting that either this afternoon or tomorrow morning. Ooh, okay, somebody said, when, Dr. Levin, when do you see a good time to use the river leaf visioning activity?
Yeah, yeah. It was part of why I wanted to throw out the thank your mind skill, because like, you're in the middle of doing something and you notice you're getting really caught up in thoughts. You couldn't really practice it then. And in those moments, I think a quick thank your mind is more useful. Like, oh, I'm getting caught up in that thought. Thanks, mind, and then get back to it. So what I see that leaves on a stream is maybe a little more like gym training, strength training, in that you're gonna get a little bit better of a sense of what it means to notice when you're caught up in your thoughts, what it means to just notice your thoughts as thoughts, but by really practicing that skill. So I recommend, if people can, to practice it um, at times they're not particularly caught up in thoughts per se. You can do it during those times too, if you're not in the middle of things and you can actually, like, close your eyes or otherwise focus. But it's a little bit more like practicing that skill a few times is going to help you better to then on the fly thank your mind and return back to what you're doing. So it's something I do more kind of like as a psychological strength training strategy. You certainly could do it when you're caught up in thoughts too. The one thing I like to watch out for is that this doesn't just become another away move, meaning, I sometimes see clients like, oh, I'm having this difficult thought. I put on a leaf, but then it came back. And it's like, oh yeah, well, it's going to come back. But the trick is just to notice it as a thought. So it's not going to like make thoughts go away. It's just going to give perspective on them.
And I think that's a really good point. I know just from my past experience, sometimes when you're in that really anxious state and you try to sit down and imagine the leaf, that's maybe not the best time to start that. So I think that's great. I think the analogy of exercising in a gym is great. And then Lisa, did you have a question? We can, if you want to type it in the chat, or we can unmute you if you would like to ask your question. I see your hand is raised.
No question.
Lisa, you're unmuted if you'd like to talk.
No, no, I don't have a question.
Okay, no worries. Alrighty, then we will call this a day then, and thank you again so much, Dr. Levin. This was awesome, and we will follow up. I'm sure people will have lots of questions for you, so we'll be in touch in the next couple days, okay?
Great. That sounds good. And yeah, I hope the links were helpful, and
Oh my gosh,
I'm happy to be a part of this. This was a lot of fun to talk about.
Yeah, and if you have any other resources or things that you think of that you'd like us to send out, please feel free to send them and we'll forward them on to everybody.
Sounds great.
All right, have a great afternoon.
Okay, take care, everybody.